A study by shareholder activist group Just Share has revealed that Shoprite had the biggest difference between the company's lowest disclosed salary and the CEO's total remuneration. This is after the advocacy group requested JSE-listed companies to reveal the wages of their lowest paid workers and remuneration details of their executives. Only 8 listed companies have thus far complied with the request. To discuss this further, we're joined by Tracey Davies, Executive Director at Just Share. Tracey, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. In South Africa, I'm sure in the world maybe, but in South Africa at least, the age-old discussion of disparities between what executives earn and what the lowest level employees earn. What do we need to understand about that context in present-day South Africa in 2023?
Good afternoon. Well, it's interesting, first of all, to note that South Africa, as the most unequal country on earth, actually has no legal requirement for pay gap disclosure. And we think that it's really important to understand not just what CEOs are earning, because as you rightly say, every year we know there's when companies release their reports and we can see what the CEOs have earned in the last financial year. There's a huge amount of discussion about it. But we've always said that that is only half the discussion when you don't understand or don't know or don't have sight of what anybody else in the company is earning. And we are trying to, the reason we did the study is to help people understand that what's called labor market inequality, in other words, the gaps between the highest and the lowest paid, is a key driver of South Africa's overall inequality. And until we have disclosure of what those gaps are, it's very difficult to have a conversation that can have a meaningful outcome. So we didn't actually do this analysis in order to highlight, that a particular CEO is earning a particular amount. Everybody knows that. Everybody can go and look at those CEOs' salaries. What we did was to say that even in the absence of a legal requirement, there are very commendably a handful of JSE-listed companies who are making these disclosures, and to show that this is actually really useful, because now we can look at those pay gaps and say, are they fair? What's interesting about them? Should something be changed? Are they contributing to overall inequality within our labor market?
When we take a look at the minimum wage in South Africa, who sits in the room that decides that?
Well, of course, there is a national minimum wage and a national minimum wage commission who determines that. But it's very important to remember that the minimum wage is, another word for the minimum wage is the wage floor. It's kind of the lowest possible wage that has been decided by policymakers as an acceptable wage to pay people. And that's one thing at a national level. But when you're talking about listed companies, these are gigantic, enormously profitable entities, it's a fairer question to say, are those companies paying even their lowest paid workers a living wage? In other words, not the minimum wage, but a wage which entitles them to live in a dignified way and doesn't trap them in the large cohort of the working poor, who are people who are literally just scraping by and cannot themselves or help their children engage in economic activities that can help our whole economy grow and benefit everybody.
You speak of dignity. I was speaking to somebody who works for one of the gigantic retailers in South Africa, and they shared that they barely make enough to actually cover transport costs. We're not talking medical aid because they don't enjoy that benefit. We're not talking about retirement funds because they don't enjoy that benefit, and so it goes. So they only make enough to get to work, and not even for the entire month. And so when you speak of a country that does not even have legislation to address this, how should we understand that in a country where we hear so much rhetoric about righting the wrongs of the past?
Well, that's, I think, a crucial question that goes to the heart of many, many issues that are still huge challenges for us in South Africa. Our labor market still reflects what is referred to as the apartheid wage gap, and many people don't like to hear that, but it is factually true. The person you were speaking to, their story is borne out by the disclosures that we have illustrated in our report. If you are a person employed by Shoprite earning their lowest minimum wage, and you work 45 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, which is arguably impossible, you're going to be earning 58,700 rands. Now, I think it's hard to argue that that is a dignified wage and that that entitles or enables people earning those wages to become productive members of our economy. And I think it's very important to know that, there are so many kind of stereotypes and things that are just accepted as truths in our economy, which we really think it's very important to start questioning and thinking about. And one of those is that this idea that, the more CEOs earn, the more there will be trickle-down economics and everybody will benefit. And I think it's been demonstrated over and over again, not just in South Africa, but across the world, that gigantic CEO pay packages do not automatically translate into gains for the rest of the economy. And while it's possible to look at this at listed companies because their disclosures are public, it's a much broader question. And we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to a society where 1 or 2 or 3% of the people in that society gather to themselves 50% of the wealth? Or do we want to talk about a society in which everyone who has a job is paid fairly in a way that enables them to improve their own contribution to the economy and perhaps in time generate jobs themselves for others to reduce our unemployment levels?
Because the consequence, Tracey, you oftentimes hear of generational curses, and here you find a country where it would appear that these generational curses, where people are trapped in a cycle of poverty, are systematic and engineered and still maintained in 2023 in South Africa, because the same person who is working for this big retailer that makes hundreds of thousands of rand a week is not able to enjoy those benefits, is not able to cover transport costs, and therefore is not able to even take their child to school, again trapping them in the cycle of poverty. What is it then, or what is the call to action? Because you're also told about having to go to school so you can become that CEO, and there you don't have an opportunity to even go to school, and you are trapped in the cycle of debt even.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And, here we're talking about entities, corporate entities that make very strong claims to being responsible citizens who care about South Africa, about South African society, and about South Africa's economy. But unfortunately, too often we hear, inequality is all about unemployment. And if you make people pay fair wages, then they won't want to employ anyone. So I would argue that that's a fallacy, because without all of these low-paid workers, these companies couldn't make any profits, right? Because who would stand behind the till when you're checking out with your groceries? Who would pack the shelves? Who would drive the groceries from the warehouse to the retail outlets? These workers are crucial components of the economy, and they are crucial to the profits that these companies make. And so to dismiss them and say, as many people do, well, you're just lucky to have a job, regardless of how low paid that job is not in accordance with our constitutional society, where we say that everyone has the right to live in dignity. So certainly from the perspective of these gigantic corporations, where the person at the top of that corporation is taking home 63 million rands in a single year, and vast cohorts of the employees of that organization are earning at best around 4,000 rands a month. I think there's a conversation to be had there about the impact that has on broader levels of inequality in our society, and who we are rewarding for what and in what measure.
Tracey Davies is the Executive Director at Just Share. Thank you for sharing your work with us.